Hi, and welcome to Rotted Reviews. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the 2021 movie, The Amityville Moon. I admit that I made a mistake with this one. I allowed myself a sliver of hope. In my opinion, we haven't had a good Amityville movie in like 4 or 5 years, not since Amityville: The Awakening. At least, I mean, even if that one wasn't great, it was at least entertaining and engaging. And then I saw that this one was coming out, and I thought, oh, great, here's another one. I mean, I have a whole folder full of upcoming Amityville movies that I'm just kind of keeping track of. And this is the one that I allowed myself a little bit of hope, mostly because when the trailer was announced and put out and everything, it was also announced by Lionsgate as a film distributor, not a producer, but even so, Lionsgate. That's not Wild Eye. That's not Uncorked. That's Lionsgate. That's some good horror legacy stuff right there. Oh my, this is bad. This one's bad. Just released today for rental or purchase on VOD platforms, including Amazon Prime, for $6. I just finished watching it, and I gotta say that it isn't worth a rental of 6 cents. Written and directed, I'm honestly assuming written and not just the fever dream Mad Men notes jotted down on the back of a Denny's napkin, by Thomas J. Churchill. This movie takes place in a female halfway house. It's kind of a place where if somebody runs afoul of the law, but they have served their time, it's a place that the state can put them for a short while until they are ready to be fully integrated back into society, and it's run by the Catholic Church. I'm assuming it's a bunch of nuns and fathers and such running around and keeping an eye on these dozen or so girls. And then there's a werewolf. I try to keep this spoiler free, but honestly, I just spoiled the entire fucking movie. That's all there is. A detective is involved. He's trying to find out what happened to some missing girls and so on, but it all takes place within here, and the detective trying to find things out and just kind of stumbling ass backwards into solutions and results. Okay, so I didn't like this movie. It's not the worst Amityville movie I've seen. Actually, you know what? By a long shot, it's not. But that's not really speaking to the quality of this one. It's more speaking to the quality of its predecessors. This is a boring movie. This clocks in at just a little shade over an hour and a half, and I gotta say that it was a very, very long hour and a half. This movie was rife with issues and problems, and it's kind of all the way through every aspect of production, from the writing to all the way into editing and so forth, but the stuff on production. Everything was just amateurish. And I get that this is a low-budget production, despite the fact that it's being distributed by Lionsgate. It is, make no mistake, a very low-budget, amateurish production. That doesn't always have to work against a movie, but in this case, it fucking does. I would say that for the first hour of the film, nothing really happens. Yes, there's plot point beats that get hit with the detective finding out more and more, but really all it just comes down to is exposition. It's characters talking to one another, and it's so dry and bland. Nothing about the dialogue pops, and there is so much of it. The detective doesn't come across anything through detective work, through clues or anything. He's basically just sitting outside smoking a cigarette when somebody comes up to him and say, hey, what about these other girls that are missing? So on and so forth. And it just kind of gets dropped in his lap. Everything gets dropped in his lap through just myriads of conversations that just drone on and have very little to do with moving the plot forward, mostly because there's really not much of a plot. Meanwhile, there are some werewolf kills that are getting peppered throughout. The problem with that is that for that first hour chunk, it's largely implied, or at the very least, just kind of, rapid close-up camera work with the actual wounds and so forth happening just off camera with strategic angles. It's just kind of that rapid fire, and then you see blood and somebody's lying on the ground with blood coming out of their mouth. It's just one of those things where, yeah, I guess they had enough budget for an admittedly halfway decent werewolf costume. I have seen far, far worse, and that is a big credit to this movie, is the werewolf itself not too bad. That's not to say they didn't find a way to fuck that up. They did, and I will get into that. Meanwhile, while we have all these conversations that are just filler, that have nothing to do with anything, character interactions that are basically nothing more than expositional backstory for characters that are nothing more than cannon fodder, so who cares? It has nothing to do with anything, and all the while, there's just this soft synth music happening in the background. It really is enough to lull anybody to sleep. I've seen plenty of bad movies where it's boring and it just lulls you through the fact that nothing is actually happening. I'm talking nothing, B-roll shots that last for 7 minutes, things like that. That really doesn't much happen here. It's just dense content of nothing that matters. And then for the last half hour, yes, stuff does pick back up. But I would say it only does it in a mediocre way. It's honestly a blessing. I feel like, oh my God, something's actually happening on screen here, where things are finally reaching a head. Everybody's locked in the building and shit kind of progresses from there. But at the same time, it's really not that much remarkable. It's just a breath of fresh air that it's fucking something. So yes, from a script level, obviously this was rife with problems. It didn't know what it wanted to be. It didn't know what direction it wanted to take. It didn't know what characters mattered, and it didn't know how to flesh out the ones that did. Then from a production standpoint, again, I acknowledge that this is a low-budget, amateurish movie. But even so, there were just some glaring errors that were just honestly inexcusable. It's just those little things that take you out of the movie, just that little prop that feels out of place, like the lieutenant that's assigned this case to the detective. You know he's a cop because he's wearing a badge with a full commendation rack pinned to a lavender shirt, or one of the sisters that's bedridden and hooked up to medical machines, including an oxygen tank, even though there's no oxygen tube, and a pulse monitoring system that's clearly nothing more than just an LCD panel that even has the words HDMI output preview emblazoned on the screen. It's just those little things that add up to a whole lot and really take you out of a movie, especially when you're not that particularly invested in the first place. And then we get to the werewolf itself. First of all, some kudos here. Again, costume itself, not bad. I've seen a lot worse. Second is in the last half hour, it does attempt a transition scene, and for not having much of a budget, I have, again, seen far worse. I think that this actually pulled that off fairly well. I don't want to say great. I'm a little hesitant on good, but I'm going to actually go ahead and say a good transition scene for the budget. However, they still, like I said, managed to find a way to screw it up, and that's basically by just showing it too much. You can do a whole lot by keeping some things off in the shadows, keeping some things off in odd angles, and I know that I derided some of the kills for being quick cut implied stuff that doesn't really show a whole lot except for aftermath. But at the same time, it's one thing to talk about werewolf kills in a werewolf movie as being a little bit lackluster for not showing enough, but the actual monster itself, it's just one of those tried and true things of showing very little of the monster. Using lighting techniques, using camera techniques, using editing techniques, and only showing what is absolutely necessary. So when you do have somebody that's in a full body costume, the one thing that you don't want to do is showing them lumbering around, somewhat jogging, chasing somebody in full view with harsh fluorescent lighting. It kind of ruins the illusion, and it certainly ruins whatever monsterific scares there might be. If this movie had any hope whatsoever, especially considering the costume wasn't really that bad, this killed it entirely. Seeing some poor actor shoved into this costume and really struggling to walk on all fours in a realistic fashion was just brutal. So I guess at that point, the question becomes, is this movie so bad that it's good? And I hesitate to say yes on this one. I kind of want to from the last half hour, but this is the problem. That first hour. To get to that last half hour of admitted mediocrity, but still kind of fun, you do have to really trudge through that first hour of really boring dialogue. And it's honestly just not worth it. If you're looking to just have some laughs with some friends at a bad movie, I got to say that I think even on that level, I would pass on this film. Getting through that first hour to get to that last half hour, it's just too much of an ask for not enough of a payoff. There are far better candidates for good bad movies out there. I would not waste your time on this one, and I certainly wouldn't waste a $6 rental. So thank you, Lionsgate, for getting my hopes up and then stabbing them in the gut and letting the intestines run out. I will no longer have any hope for an Amityville movie moving forward. It was folly in the first place, and I acknowledge that now. So that should about do it for this review. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I look forward to seeing you on my next review. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.